wrong with our political system? Is the system still capable of serving our long and broad-term interests? How do we keep greed, lust for power, and self-interest from dominating our government?
Wow.
Are we losing our ability to govern ourselves? What can we do to save our republic? That's going to be the talk. Stephen is the president of a nonprofit corporation called Americans United to Rebuild Democracy. The focus is political reform, specifically establishing congressional term limits, promoting clean elections, and ending gerrymandering. I hope he'll tell us more about that tonight. He's trying to find some common ground between progressives and conservatives in New Hampshire and nationwide, which is a really exciting project, which fits really well with our kind of independent spirit too, with Seacoast Common Sense Community Builders. Stephen's worked in real estate. He's taught high school social studies. He served as a member of the adjunct faculty at Franklin Pierce College, teaching American history. I can attest to that. He educates me about history all the time. He's a local actor, playwright, and historian. He's co-authoring a forthcoming book entitled Moon Island, A True Story of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Cannibalism, which is an awesome editor-based title. I mean, you have to go pick that book up, right? I mean, that's cannibalism, has to be that, right?
That's the intersection with the politics, cannibalism parts.
Yeah, I got the metaphor. Okay. Stephen has, I'm getting through this. Stephen has a BA and an MBA in American History from UMass Amherst. He finished coursework on a doctoral degree from the College of William and Mary, which is a pretty good Republican school, I think, College of William and Mary. He has published for the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute. He served briefly as resident scholar at U.S. term limits. He considers himself an economic and constitutional conservative, a foreign policy moderate, and a liberal on most social issues. Welcome, Stephen Erickson.
Thank you, Kevin. There's some noise in the background, so if I'm not loud enough, please just let me know. It's great to be here and great to participate in this community building series. I want to begin tonight by talking a little bit about something we all understand pretty well, and that our political system seems pretty dysfunctional. We all have a sense that something's going wrong. And conservatives, of course, believe that liberals and progressives are what's going wrong. And liberals and progressives believe that the problem is conservatives. And I don't want to imply or suggest that this left-right debate doesn't matter. It does matter, and I'm not neutral myself. But what I want to suggest here tonight is that there's might be more going on here than just the failure of conservative philosophy or the failure of progressivism. And maybe there's something else afoot. There is this profound sense that somehow we're lost. So I want to look at this subject historically. It's kind of an historic whodunit. What has gone wrong? Is it just left and right? Or is there something else? Are we losing our ability to govern ourselves? Have we lost our sense of civic virtue? You know, are we the people? Are we the problem? So if you're lost, what you do is you look back over the road you've traveled, right? You look back over history. So let's go back to the beginning of our history, to the American Revolution, right? And at the time of the American Revolution, the American colonists looked at the mother country and they said, well, those people have lost their ability to govern themselves. They're losing their sense of civic virtue. To the American colonists, it seemed that the mother country and the political system there was hopelessly corrupt. The franchise was very narrow. Political offices were for sale. The Crown regularly bought off members of Parliament. And in the colonies, the manifestation of this corruption was what we know of all the tax policies. The Stamp Act, the Townsend duties, and ultimately the tea tax. And this seemed like a cancer, a corrupt system and polity that was now spreading to the colonies. And something would have to be done about it, or the infection the corruption would spread to America. So one response to all of these acts, these taxes, were boycotts. They started boycotting English goods. Now, politically, of course, that's a very useful tool, because if you boycott the goods, you hurt the merchants back in England, because these are luxury goods. Remember, the colonies are providing raw goods, raw materials for the mother country. The mother country is sending manufactured goods to the colonies. So you know, let's get them where they hurt. We'll boycott these merchants and make them put pressure on Parliament to take the taxes off us. So it was a very practical effect. But there was also another purpose in these boycotts, a secondary effect, which was a kind of a test of the colonists' civic virtue. Now, we really need to explain what we mean by civic virtue, because this idea goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And we have a modern idea, a sociological term that's very similar, which is called social capital, right? But basically it's pretty simple. If your community has a lot of civic virtue, it means you're willing to make some sacrifices voluntarily for your neighbors. You're willing to help out. You're willing, you obey the laws, you help your neighbors, you participate in the political system, right? And those kinds of societies are very healthy. You join voluntary organizations like the Seacoast Common Sense Community Builders, right? Is a sign that you all have civic virtue. And then the opposite is also true, right? If you lack civic virtue, then you're trying to screw your neighbor, right? You're taking advantage of the system, right? You're bribing people. You're breaking the law whenever you can. You're taking from the community for your own self-interest. So that's the other extreme. And we all, in our heart of hearts, probably acknowledge that this stuff matters, because remember what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they tried to have a democracy, but they had no sense of this civic virtue because they hadn't learned that under the old Soviet system. Same is true when the United States invades Iraq. We'll build a nation there, but again, Muslim political values overlaid with the Stalinist kind of Saddam Hussein regime doesn't work very well, because they don't have that history of civic virtue, right? So we all acknowledge that this is important, I would think. So for the colonists, then, getting back to the revolution, it was important, these embargoes were important, not just to pinch the British merchants, but also as a test of the colonists' own civic virtue. Could you do without all these luxuries and stuff? All right? So that was a test. And they passed. They hurt those English merchants, and one by one, these taxes, the Stamp Act and the Townsend duties were withdrawn. But the tea tax, that was a little trickier because there was a big glut of tea on the market, and so the English crown could actually raise the duty on the tea, but it wouldn't really affect the price because there was this oversupply. And that was a real test, because it's just one product, the tea's cheaper than it's ever been. Can we really keep people from buying the tea? So Sam Adams decided, well, we better dump it in Boston Harbor just to make sure no one buys his tea. So that's what happened. And that led to the British occupation of Boston, which ultimately leads to Lexington, Concord, and the Revolution itself. So during the course of the Revolution, again, the idea of civic virtue is important. The American soldiers had a lot of civic virtue. The ones who fought with Washington, Washington crosses the Delaware, and the soldiers are in the snow, in bare feet, in the snow, and they rout the redcoats at Princeton. But this is a warning sign here, because why were they in bare feet? Why did American soldiers in bare feet while the colonists are safe and warm in their own houses? In other words, there were signs during the Revolution itself that maybe the American people didn't have enough civic virtue. So, Revolution ends, and pretty soon some of the states aren't paying their debts, And the soldiers who fought in the revolution aren't getting paid to have these IOUs. Okay? And it begins to look like, huh, you know, is civic virtue enough? And the place where this all became most alarming was in Massachusetts. If you haven't been to school in the last 10 years, you probably don't know the new interpretation of Shays' Rebellion. But the old interpretation went like this. After the revolution, there were a lot of middling and poor farmers who went out and bought lots of stuff that they couldn't get during the revolution. Goods that came imported from England. And they bought this stuff and they lived beyond their means and they went into debt. And when they couldn't pay their debts anymore because the economy contracted and the merchants started calling in these debts, they went and they stormed the courthouses and they shut the courthouses down so that no one could collect the money, and they took up arms against the state, against Massachusetts. Irresponsible debtors, lured by the capitalists into the capitalist system, and ultimately took up arms. Well, that's actually not what happened. And there's a really good book by Leonard Richards, a new interpretation of Shays' Rebellion. And you'll see maybe in a minute why I want to talk about Shays' Rebellion. So, after the revolution, these soldiers who had fought in Washington's army, they were given these notes for all their backpack from the various states. And they say, okay, you know, I want to get paid now, but none of the states could pay them. And having been away from their family farms for all these years, the farms had degraded. You know, they needed to cut back the trees. They needed to plant new crops. And they needed money to do this. And they couldn't get paid for their service in the Continental Army. So they sold off these securities. At best at a rate of 4 to 1, sometimes at a rate of 40 to 1 to 40, on the pennies on the dollar. Okay? And they sold these notes to speculators, this is Massachusetts, in Boston. All right? And these speculators begin to trade these securities. All right?
Wow, this sounds familiar.
Exactly. All right? And they say when the news was that maybe the state was going to pay off the debt, the value of the securities goes up, and oh, well, now maybe not, security goes down. So these speculators managed to get control of the government in Massachusetts. They do it in the wintertime when the farmers from the hinterland can't get to Boston. Okay? And unlike any other colony, they pass a law that will redeem these securities at a 1-to-1 ratio. All right. So actually, for the poor soldier farmer, he would have to pay in taxes to pay off these debts much more than he actually got for selling the security in the first place. All right. So maybe you understand why they took up these arms, why they took up arms. So the merchants in Boston, the speculators, managed to control the messaging. So, you know, for much of the rest of the country, it looked like the farmers were just being irresponsible. Eventually, word gets out, and some people, like James Madison, get some respect. But one thing is clear: there's no civic virtue in this story at all. You have merchants ripping off heroes of the revolution. You have these farmers with so little faith in the system that they're compelled to take up arms. Only a handful would count. But it was an alarm for everyone who would become a Federalist, including James Madison, my hero. So Madison's looking at this saying, okay, civic virtue, it's not working. It's not enough. We can't build a system on civic virtue alone. We need the proper architecture of the democracy. And they use the word democracy of the republic. We need architecture. We need a defense. And when Madison planned and plotted for the Federal Convention in Philadelphia, and he and the other founding fathers, they studied all of the republics that had ever been. From ancient Greece, the Republic in Venice, in Holland, and you know, of course, these republics, they all eventually died, so they did autopsies, really, on these dead republics. Why they died, what had gone wrong, and how could we avoid making the same mistakes in our new American republic? And what Madison concluded was the great threat to Republican government is faction. Read Federalist 10 if you're interested in this. Now, faction is nearly identical to our notion of special interests. What is a faction? Well, in Madison's day, it could be the agricultural interest, it could be a manufacturing interest, it could be the rich or the poor or the middle class, it could be the fishing industry, it could be creditors and debtors, and each one of these groups has an interest, and these interests are endemic in free society. They're always going to be there, and the only way that you can control these interests, if you want to absolutely control them, is to take away liberty itself, right? And that's an unacceptable outcome. The most dangerous factions were those that could form a majority, that could take over the whole system, because that would give them the ability to oppress everybody else. So if a faction could ever achieve a majority, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Now, conventionally, and the Federalists made this argument, all republics had always been small. So a lot of people said, you know, to the anti-federalists said, well, you know, you can't have a big republic because it's never been done, right? Madison had an answer. He said, yes, and the big republic is an advantage because it'll be really hard for any one majority faction to take over, right? Because in a big republic, you have so many more interests, right? So many more interests. So it's really going to be much harder for one interest to take over. So that was Madison's theory of the large republic. But just as during the Revolution we could see that maybe civic virtue wouldn't be enough, so we could see during the time of the debate about the federal Constitution, maybe this big republic thing wasn't enough too, because there was one really big, powerful faction at the time of the American founding that was at odds with much of the country. And that faction was, of course, the slave-based economic system of the South. So you may know that in the Constitution, they compromised on the slave trade. They declared that for representational purposes, a slave would be worth 3/5 of a person. This was very offensive to Quakers in Pennsylvania and to many New Englanders. Here in New Hampshire, we abolished slavery, I think it was 1794, 1796, somewhere in there. So the seeds of that deadly faction were already there to be seen in 1787. And sure enough, the North and the South, as you know from your history, are vying for control of the West throughout much of the 19th century, which will determine whether or not ultimately the United States is a country based on a slave system, economic system, or one on a market-based system, such as the one that existed in the North. And by 1860, and with the election of Abraham Lincoln, it became clear the South was going to lose this debate, and they pulled out of the Union. And you can't let, in Republican theory, you cannot leave the Union if you lose an election because it destroys the entire republic. The South can leave, then why can't South Carolina leave the Confederacy, and Charleston leave South Carolina, and Ward 4 in Charleston leave Charleston? You end up with anarchy. So, Civil War. I mean, Madison said that factions were the most deadly and dangerous threat to any republic. Well, sure enough, 625,000 Americans lost their lives in the Civil War, a sum total greater than all of America's wars put together up until the time of the Revolution, time of Vietnam. So, when the Civil War was over, okay, well, we look around, we don't see another faction like that of the slave-based economic system of the South, right? So we should be in the clear. We should be in the clear. But things were happening in the economy, even at the time of the Civil War. Remarkable, amazing, and good things. Like the railroads, telegraph, technology, immigrants are coming into the country, productivity increases. So for the next 150 years, I mean, the rate of change is just phenomenal. I mean, consider, you know, the complexity of our economy today compared to James Madison's time. You know, we have you know, all these different forms of energy: coal, oil, natural gas. We have alternative energies. We have agribusiness. With consumer society, with all these different products available. Our poorest people today live, in terms of health and diet, better than royalty did in the 18th century. So I mean, you know, the change is unprecedented. The wealth is unprecedented. And there's lots of studies done about the alienating nature too, as people move to cities. I mean, it is a revolutionary change. And to manage this change, I mean, let's just consider some of the interests. Energy, we have coal, oil, natural gas, alternatives, agribusiness, corn, sugar, wheat, organic finance. We have big banks, small banks, lending, securities. We have big medical industry, insurance, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications. The end of the 20th century, we see the information revolution. And all this is kind of scary, and it needs to be managed. And so we devote 20%, roughly, of our resources to the federal government. And today, we argue again, left and right, about, you know, the progressives say, well, we need to actually increase that to control all this chaos, to eliminate pollution, for better education, for better standards of living, for, you know, for stronger safety net. And conservatives say just the opposite, that's slowing our economic growth. And this is an important debate, and I don't dispute that it is. But is this the only debate that matters? I think not. I'd like to speak a little bit now about self-evident truths, which are outside this left-right debate. I mean, self-evident truths. You know, we're the common sense community builders, right? Common sense relates closely to self-evident truths. And we're a nation built on self-evident truths. The most beautiful of these are found in our Declaration of Independence, which says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And that's like political poetry, right? But what about some uglier self-evident truths that we face today? And the thing about a self-evident truth is, we all get it. Whether we're conservatives, progressives, or centrists, we all get it. I want to suggest to you that we have three of these, at least three. The first is that members of Congress or lawmakers should not be taking money from the same interests they regulate. Let's go back to Madison. All right? Madison created this system of checks and balances to try to slow down those factions. Probably didn't stress that enough. Okay? Created a system of checks and balances to try to slow down factions, slow down the special interests. Special interest might get its way in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate there was supposed to be a cooling chamber, you know, where they'd be more reflective, and maybe that special interest would be killed there. And if not, the president had a veto. the president, elected by the entire country, could see the national interest more clearly. So, but today, virtually every incentive in the system is set to serve the narrow and short-term interests. Whereas Madison has said that's never going to work. That's feeding faction. Now, we're so much wealthier today, and we have all of these diverse interests. And are they not all feeding at the trough together? Something Madison could not have conceived of. Okay? So here's the question to think about. Is the total sum interest of the United States, is the interest of the United States the same as the sum total of all of those special interests? Do all those little interests that are funding political campaigns, do they equal the national interest? Most citizens would say no. Most citizens would say no. And it seems obvious. That our lawmakers take money from the same interests they regulate is a self-evident truth number 2 is that our political leaders are more concerned about their own political power and their political careers than they are the long-term interests of the United States. They're more concerned about the next re-election than they are the next generation. Self-evident truth. We all agree, do we not? Madison actually proposed term limits. This isn't well known, but in the Virginia plan, Madison proposed a radical one-term limit for the House of Representatives, for members of the House. One term and out. And the idea was to make them more like a jury, right? To give them that judicious nature. Think about a jury for a minute. It's pretty amazing. We take people off the street from all manners of, all walks of life, and we educate them on the law in question. We teach them the particulars of the case. We put the power of life and death in their hands sometimes. All right? And sometimes we ask them, not be allowed to serve in office until they were so old that it would be impossible for them to run again. and I mean, think of it, that makes sense, because these are people who wouldn't be concerned about acquiring more wealth necessarily. Not likely. They'd be thinking about their legacy. It makes a lot of sense. Wrong here. If we hold Congress in such low esteem, but such a high percentage are re-elected every time. Okay? So the power of incumbencies are well known and well studied. They have huge fundraising advantages. Special interests invested in incumbents because incumbents win. Incumbents win because they get money from special interests. Districts are gerrymandered. Incumbent politicians have big staffs, which are perpetual re-election campaigns. So it's not rocket science to appreciate why they're always re-elected, almost always. So those are three fundamental reforms, the three fundamental self-evident truths. So my question to you is this: do we have the civic virtue to fix this? Can we fix this? Do we have what it takes to right this system? And some of the data is not encouraging. This is from a study last year, Newsweek magazine. They interviewed a bunch of people, and they gave them the citizenship test that new immigrants get. 38% failed. 29% couldn't name the vice president. 73% of all Americans knew little or nothing about the Cold War. 40% didn't know why America fought Germany, Japan, and Italy during World War II. 63% didn't know the correct number of Supreme Court justices, let alone their names. 65% knew nothing about the Constitutional Convention. 70% didn't know the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. 23% didn't know Martin Luther King fought for civil rights. 40% couldn't explain the Bill of Rights. And 6% didn't know the 4th of July was Independence Day. Doesn't bode well. So maybe we have lost our civic virtue. Maybe we can't fix this. I like to tell a story from 9/11. Maybe some of you have heard the story, but and there were many stories of heroism on 9/11. But after the first planes that hit the World Trade Center and the other plane that hit the Pentagon, there was that one plane in the air that was headed for Washington. And fighters at Andrews Air Force Base scrambled. There were two of them scrambled. One was, the commander was Captain Mark Sasseville, I think. And the other pilot was actually a woman, Heather Lucky Penny. And their mission was to intercept that flight over Pennsylvania and take it down, even though there were American citizens aboard. But here's the thing. The Andrews Air Force Base had been configured still in a Cold War fashion to protect the United States from Russian planes coming over the Arctic Circle. And so they weren't defended against this, and they had just been on training exercises. These planes were not armed. They were not armed. There was no ammunition, and they didn't have time to load them. So Mark Sasseville and Heather Walsh, did I say? Lucky Penny, were on a suicide mission. They were going to ram that plane, and they were ready to do it. Now that's just one example of the kind of character we still have in this country. And there were lots of instances of heroic character on 9/11, and we still send our young men and women to perform the bravest deeds in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and they willingly go and they do very heroic things. So we look at how little we know about our history and our political system, we get discouraged. But government, self-government, it's like they're like muscles, right? You don't use them, they atrophy. You get cynical, you tune it all out. So, yes?
You know, there's nothing heroic about not having a plane available. That's stupid. I mean, that's a waste. That's even more stupid than people not knowing that July the 4th is Independence Day. That's not heroic.
Well, I think to give up your life to save others.
Yeah, what a waste. I don't pay taxes to the military to have people ram a plane into another one because there's not one loaded to defend the area. You know, that's just idiotic. But the other thing was all those people who don't remember from high school, you know, able to explain the Bill of Rights. I don't see how that's what's the term used, social virtue?
Civic virtue.
Civic
Yeah.
virtue, I thought, was taking care of each other, not people who don't remember what they learned in high school.
Well, civic virtue it includes being familiar with the institutions of your government.
You said being involved in the political system.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And frankly, I'd be pretty grateful if I was happening to be visiting the Capitol on the day that plane was supposed to hit, and the people in that plane had not risen up, and that plane killed me or my family or my loved ones. I would say, thank you, Heather Penny. I mean, I think it would be
As
pretty
a veteran, I would have done that.
Yeah. But
As a veteran, that would have been your job.
It would have been.
Yeah.
And I would have done it.
But not every society has people like that willing to do. I think, and this is a subjective view, that we Americans still have a remarkable amount of civic capital, civic virtue. And I go to Europe a lot because my wife is from France, and frankly, I can tell you stories about France that my wife would wish that I would not know. Yeah. So I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same. So, do we have what's necessary? So as Kevin said, I'm the president of Americans United to Rebuild Democracy, and we have a 3-reform proposal to address those 3 self-evident truths that I mentioned. And here's our proposal. We intend to package together 3 fundamental reforms. A clean election system in which our elected leaders would no longer be able to be permitted to take campaign money from the same interests they regulate. Congressional term limits, which would limit the amount of years that they can stay in office, to try to get them focused on the big picture and not their next re-election. And an end to gerrymandering, which would help make elections more fair. The three reforms together would form a kind of comprehensive political reform solution. You're probably wondering, well, what does he mean by a clean election system? Okay? We propose a framework because we're so divided in this country between right and left that there has to be trust in the writing of this thing. So we are in the process of recruiting trusted national leaders on the left and the right, names that you would recognize, to craft the particulars of this constitutional amendment. Clean election system might mean, it would certainly mean some kind of democratization of the funding process. One idea is to give every citizen their first $50 in taxes back, so that they would, to donate to a political candidate could be divided between House, Senate, and presidential candidates. It might mean a blind trust, eliminating the selling, the buying and selling of influence. So you want to give your contribution to a candidate, you still have the liberty to do that, but the candidate's not going to know where the money's coming from.
That's good.
It might mean free media. In other words, media, instead of paying business and corporate taxes and licensing fees, they would be required to provide free airtime to candidates, particularly in the form of debates and first-person political statements. This would be useful because it would make the dialogue more civil. These wouldn't be negative ads. These would be actual debates, and candidates tend to be more civil when they have to make the statement themselves in their own voice.
But who would enforce this?
Well, the agency will have to be created. I personally favor putting it under the Supreme Court. But again, it's to be negotiated. And it's complicated and it's potentially fraught with lots of problems. It's a good question. But you have to ask yourself, is this likely to be better than a system based on institutionalized bribery and extortion, which is what our current system is? Every piece of legislation passed before Congress and not passed is affected by campaign money. So that is the question. Yes.
I'm just trying to unwind some of this. Like, I'm thinking of the term special interest. I know you can think of that as a pejorative, but you know the connotations are really. But at the same time, isn't that kind of like an outgrowth of democracy to prevent against the tyranny of the majority. So in a way, people might need to band together against those incompetent politicians. So I'm trying to unwind this. So what you may be saying is term limits would, because I'm thinking special interest isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if somebody is,
It's a bad thing if the special interest is actually bribing the politician. If the politician is acting on a gift. And by the way, when you to listen to all the other organizations, we're the only ones dedicated to a balanced right-left approach. All the left ones say it's all special interests manipulating the government. It's also true that legislators shake down special interests for cash, mafia style. Like they will threaten those special interests. So what this is really about is just creating a wall between the special interests and the government.
but should they be able to,
Yes, you can
farmers,
petition,
fishermen,
yes. The right to petition your government is sacred. It's the campaign contribution that is the corrupting piece.
See, we have 3 minutes left
Okay.
of recording time.
All right, okay, that's fine. So the third reform is an end to gerrymandering. It could be like what California has recently done. It could be completely automated. You could completely automate the drawing of district lines. So clean election system, term limits, and an end to gerrymandering. Pretty close to a comprehensive solution that addresses all of those self-evident truths. This would give clean candidates, regardless of political persuasion, a platform to run on. It would be a signal to voters that, yes, this is someone who wants to be a true public servant and is not there for themselves or to serve special interests. And ultimately, it's what we do to restore James Madison's vision for a republic that will be more judicious, that will serve the common and long-term interests of the country and not the narrow interests of special interests or the election cycle, whether it's 2 years or 6 years. I'll just end up with this and take some more questions. But there's generally three objections to this plan. One comes from conservatives, one comes from progressives, and the other comes from self-styled realists. Okay? The progressives will, well, as you start with, the conservatives will say, isn't this like public campaign finance? And you know, why should I pay my tax dollars for an opinion that I don't agree with? Well, I've already suggested the voucher system would take away the last part of that, and this is really what we were talking. Once you agree that federal office holders, elected office holders, should not be taking money from the same interests they regulate, then you have to fund the political system somehow. And if you don't do it, it will favor incumbents. You won't have fair elections because incumbents will have all the power. The other objection comes from progressives. We say term limits. Why do we need term limits, especially if we have clean elections, fair elections? We'd be able to throw them out. Well, the problem is, even if you have clean elections, you'll still have short-sighted government. You'll still have career politicians thinking about the 2-year election cycle and the 6-year election cycle. Just getting the special interest money out is not enough. And then the argument that the realists, so-called realists, make is that, and I believe me, I get this a lot. People pat me on the head. You're trying to what? Amend the Constitution? Yeah, right. Well, now imagine if the abolitionists had been discouraged, or the women's suffragists. You know, I would say that they faced much higher hurdles than we do today, because the American people are actually with us. I missed this in my notes, but we had all those terrible things to say about the knowledge of a lot of our people. But here's something else from Pew Research. When asked about a series of criticisms of elected officials in Washington, did they care only about their